And welcome everybody, we are here in Liverpool, United Kingdom for the 2024 Liverpool Regional Championships.
Big blood moon going off onto the open pond, it's enough.
Some of the damage before does guarantee
To pick up the KO on the Raging Bolt, a critical hit.
damage indeed is the name of the game. The Incineroar is out for the count, bringing Eduardo down to his final two.
Another historic chapter of Pokemon battling took place in Europe this weekend at the Liverpool Regional Championships. 642 players made this tournament the largest regional in European VGC history. Following up the massive spectacle we saw the weekend before in Charlotte, two major Regulation F tournaments had concluded before players across the pond had any chance to test their ideas at official events. As the game has evolved into a more global circuit, the European VGC community has grown remarkably in both size and strength. In contrast to a competitive scene like Super Smash Bros. Melee, there's no reason I'm saying this one, where the player base in Europe has no choice but to journey to the United States to play against the strongest region on their home turf. In Pokemon, Europe has a claim to collectively the strongest player base in the world. Italy, Spain, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom have all seen new stars explode into the upper echelons and veterans mature into almost mythical beacons of consistency. Marco Hermantha Silva, Alex Gomez, Eduardo Cunha. It was not a foregone conclusion that players of that caliber would dominate this tournament, but you'd be a fool to bet against them. This event was loaded with the biggest names you could find. 12 of the top 16 players on the European leaderboard were in attendance. Additionally, notable players outside of the leaderboards like Alessio Yuri Boschetto, Tehran Birdie, and even one of America's best, Joseph Ugarte, made the journey for what he preaches is one of the most well-run tournaments on the circuit. As mentioned earlier, this would be Europe's first crack at Reg F, with a format that seemed to be evolving so rapidly. So being the third major in this rotation could be a disadvantage. In our last recap, we discussed this briefly. The strongest archetypes aren't really falling off too drastically in this power struggle just because new cores are establishing their footing. Instead, it seems like there's an additive nature to all the new teams that develop. They capture a share of the market but don't push too many other teams out of contention. Arcaludon Rain, Tornadus Glamora, Gouging Fire Wellspring, Farigiraf Blood Moon Ursaluna, Iron Crown Indeedee, the pursuit of the elusive good matchup spread into a field this diverse has players voicing their complaints. To start the day off, one of Italy's recent breakout stars, Federico Camporesi, a semi-finalist at the 2023 World Championships, would be taking on one of the newer crop of French players, Boris Ham, who got top 16 at the Lille Regional Championships a couple months ago. On Boris's team, a recent metagame development courtesy of Luca Tregut was our first act, Gouging Fire Ogerpon. Boris had a similar composition to Luca's team but swapped in Landorus over Chien Pao, a simple change that likely helps the team perform better into opposing Ogerpons, especially of the Hearthflame variant. And lucky for Boris, Federico was using one of the most popular Ogerpon Hearthflame teams, Nick Donnelly's second place Charlotte squad. But something was off here. Federico was missing a Farigiraf, and there wasn't anything to replace it. Due to a penalty incurred during a team check, Boris was awarded the win for Game 1 and Federico had a flagged Pokemon removed. Hopping into Game 2, Boris had a plan to ramp Ogerpon with Gouging Fire. He Terra Waters, Howls to boost its attack, and Ivy Cudgels for the knockout into Tornadus. But Federico knew to pull this match off he would need to get aggressive. Tornadus set Tailwind before fainting and Ursaluna bravely didn't protect, so Hyper Voice does a good chunk of damage. Perfectly planned, right as Urshifu comes in. A double knockout was easy pickings, and with only Incineroar and Fluttermane in the back, the Bad News Bears cleaned the game up. Game 2 goes to Federico. Federico mixes it up for the final game. Tornadus Urshifu square up into Gouging Fire Rillaboom. With no Armor Tail ability to scare away Fake Out, Federico is lacking options. Once again, an aggressive play happens, but from both players this time. Rillaboom and Gouging Fake Out and KO Tornadus with Heat Crash, but Urshifu close combats into the Rillaboom slot. Then Ursaluna hits the field. Gouging Fire goes for a Burning Bulwark to protect, and Urshifu Terra Darks to KO Rillaboom with Wicked Blow, while Ursaluna's Earth Power gets blocked. On the next turn, Gouging rips a Breaking Swipe and Ogerpon successfully gets a super effective Horn Leech off into the Ursaluna, but it barely misses the knockout. Wicked Blow smacks the Ogerpon down to only 11 HP, and Earth Power KOs the Gouging Fire. Life Orb Recoil finally finishes off the Ursaluna, and Fluttermane hits the field for Boris while Federico sends out Hearthflame Ogerpon. In the final stage of the game, Follow Me draws away a Sucker Punch. Fluttermane takes the Urshifu with a Moonblast, and Cudgel takes out the Ogerpon. Fluttermane does have a Focus Sash though, so it can win this if it gets a 2-hit knockout with Shadow Ball. It goes for it, and it barely does 40%, so Boris needs a crit. But he doesn't get it. Against all of the odds, Federico wins this set.
You never know what happens in this game.
No, you certainly don't.
In round 4, 2 of the top 16 players on Europe's leaderboard would face off. The reigning NAIC champion and Spanish legend Alex Gomez would be facing Hengyu Zhang from China. And yes, you can move from a different region to compete for points on the European leaderboards. Hengyu was using a pretty standard team of Tornadus, Urshifu, Chiyu, Flutter, Rillaboom, and is that a Zarina? What? Okay, we'll get back to that. Alex was using a team many may not have known was on the come-up recently. For some fun context, this team was floating around the ladder under an alt named Billy the Vikavolt, later revealed to be Scott Iwafuchi. It features a powerful core of Porygon 2, Amoonguss, Incineroar, and Fluttermane with 2 metagame calls: Iron Defense, Body Press, Como, and the first ballot Regulation C Hall of Famer, Ting Lu. Both kinda make sense if you think about it. Ting Lu handles Psy Spam teams, and Como adds an extra win condition against Fire, Water, Grass cores without having to worry about Intimidate. In Game 1, Alex leads Incineroar Porygon into Fluttermane Chiyu. Flutter and Chi, especially when Chiyu has Ghost Terra, normally pose a massive problem for Trick Room setters, but Porygon 2 has Eviolite boosted defenses and a Poison Terra, which means it likely gets to get the Trick Room up regardless of a double target from the pair. On turn 1, Incineroar swaps out immediately to Ting Lu to counteract Chi's Beads of Ruin, but Hengyu plays it smart, protecting its Chiyu to keep its Sash intact. Fluttermane Terra Fairies while P2 Terra Poisons, and Moonblast targets the Incineroar slot. Ting Lu shockingly survives with 5 HP though, while Porygon 2 gets a crucial Trick Room up. On turn 2, Flutter swaps to Rillaboom, but because the P2 got an attack boost with Download, Terra Blast becomes a physical attack. Terra Poison Terra Blast does massive damage to Rillaboom as it switches in, and Ting Lu hits Chiyu with a Stomping, bringing it down to Sash. In return, Chiyu Snarl connects on both and KOs Ting Lu, while Incineroar hits the field with 3 turns of Trick Room left. Hengyu swaps Chiyu out to Urshifu Rapid Strike. Rillaboom fakes out the P2, and the Flare Blitz KOs Rillaboom in exchange. Flutter comes back in, with 2 turns of Trick Room left. On turn 4, Porygon 2 shows off some muscle. Poison Terra Blast one-shots Flutter because of the download boost and Fairy-type weakness. Incineroar parting shots off the Urshifu. Amoonguss hits the field to soak up the Surging Strikes, taking a chunk of its health in return thanks to the help of the Rocky Helmet chip. And there's 1 turn of Trick Room left. And Alex pulls off a routine play. He punishes Hengyu's double protects to avoid a possible Spore by getting Fake Out pressure in. It's game over from this position. In Game 2, Alex keeps the leads the same, Incineroar P2, but Hengyu switches it up by sending Chi Urshifu. Download gives it an attack boost again. What? On turn 1, Incineroar fakes out Urshifu to protect Porygon, and Chiyu snarls, not fearing the threat of P2 utilizing Physical Terra Blast yet, as the Porygon 2 goes for Trick Room. On the first turn of Trick Room, P2 Terra Blasts the Chiyu for practically nothing, but importantly breaks its Focus Sash. Incineroar parting shots Urshifu, and Alex carefully considers his best choice, but seeing that the Chiyu didn't protect, instead of Amoonguss, he goes to Ting Lu. Urshifu only does 50% with close combat at -2, and Heatwave doesn't KO because of Ting Lu's Vessel of Ruin. On turn 3, Rillaboom comes in for Chiyu and sets Grassy Terrain. Ting Lu Terra Poisons this time instead, and Porygon gets its health back up with Recover, but Surging Strikes from Urshifu wipes the recovered health away almost exactly. Hengyu has kept up exactly the type of pressure needed to keep this game winnable. But pressure is sort of a game of chicken. Ting Lu swaps to Amoonguss, and Urshifu detects, easing off that pressure, and Alex once again has P2 recover. Rillaboom's Stomping Tantrum goes into Amoonguss, and Hengyu has nothing to soak up a Spore in the Urshifu slot. P2 swaps to Incineroar, Amoonguss spores the Urshifu, and Woodhammer hits Incineroar as it comes in. A perfect pivot for Alex, but Trick Room expires and he has no offensive pressure into the pesky Urshifu still. Amoonguss Rage Powders in case the Urshifu wakes up because it was spored in Trick Room. Stays asleep, but Rillaboom ignores Rage Powder and Stomping does good damage to Incineroar. Alex gets the parting shot back into P2. With Trick Room and Spore pressure, Hengyu has no way to properly threaten damage and will need to bank on sleep turns being low. Alex is able to play a slow game here and pick off each piece one by one, and the clock ticks down to 0, and because Alex has a lead in total number of Pokemon, the victory is his.
I haven't really had any practice at all with the team.
In round 5, we got to see Mamoswine make its stream debut in Generation 9 on Norwegian player Steiner Nicholson's team, but he ended up not bringing it. He also lost the set in a pretty quick 2 games to Daniel Day Tierney, and in order to spread propaganda, I'm not going to show how he lost it and simply say it is because Mamoswine was benched. In round 6, America's crowd favorite Joseph Ugarte would be taking on Yantong Z from China.
Joe's reputation precedes him. If you're new to this, you can check out a full Joe Ugarte story right over here, but Yantong we couldn't find any recent result history for, so this could very well be their first time popping off like this. Joe was running the hot new commodity Gouging Fire and Ogerpon Wellspring, but incorporated it into his existing core of Pow Knight, Gambit, and Amoonguss. Yantong had what sort of classifies as a new variation of Protosynthesis spam. Farigiraf, Ogerpon Hearthflame with 3 Protomons, Walking Wake, Raging Bolt, and Fluttermane. Looking at Joe's old composition of his team, the adjustments stand out. This matchup would be bad for Joe's other version of the team, but with Gouging Fire, the combination of Torkoal and Fluttermane is less problematic. In Game 1, Yantong leads Ogerpon Hearthflame and Walking Wake, and Joe leads Gouging Fire Amoonguss. Joe immediately terastallizes his Amoonguss into a water type, but Yantong scouts this out with a Spiky Shield and a Protect. Gouging Fire breaking swipes but takes recoil damage from the Spiky Shield. After the turn of scouting, Joe swaps Amoonguss to Gambit and has his Gouging Fire protect with Burning Bulwark. Yantong's Ogerpon Hearthflame goes for Follow Me to play around the threat of Spore, and Walking Wake launches a Draco Meteor into the protecting Gouging Fire. Yantong tries to make a cleverly disguised play here. Ogerpon Hearthflame swaps into Torkoal. Sun gets set, boosting the speed of Walking Wake, which allows it to outpace Gouging Fire and Draco Meteor it, but it misses. King Gambit Sucker Punches the Wake, and Gouging Fire breaking swipes for chip on Torkoal and almost gets the knockout, but the Paradox Suicune hangs on. With the opportunity to delete the Gouging Fire missed, Wake swaps out to Flutter. Joe goes for a double protect to block a bold Eruption from the Torkoal. Fluttermane immediately swaps back to Walking Wake for what looks to be a sacrifice. Gambit swaps out to Amoonguss. Torkoal Terra fires, and Gouging Fire heat crashes into the Walking Wake that switched in, and because that's a weight-based move and a 4x resist, Walking Wake survives. Torkoal now goes for the Terra Sun boosted Heat Wave, but with both Gouging Fire and Terra Water Amoonguss, they take the damage well. Torkoal swaps back into Fluttermane, Amoonguss protects Gouging with Rage Powder and pulls away the Draco Meteor from Walking Wake, losing all of its remaining health. The Walking Wake now feints to the recoil from Life Orb, and Joe makes the heads up play of clicking Heat Crash into the Walking Wake slot. Since it knocked itself out and Fluttermane swapped in expecting a breaking swipe, Joe gets a bonus KO into Fluttermane. This mistake is terribly punishing for Yantong, and not a risk you can take against a world-class player like Joe. Preserving Terastallization for Fluttermane and setting up a late game for Ogerpon with Follow Me and Terra Fairy Specs Gleam spam would have been a much safer endgame, especially after seeing the Terra Water on Amoonguss, Joe's only fairy resist. In Game 2, Yantong leads Walking Wake Ogerpon, and Joe leads Ogerpon Wellspring and...
Has adjusted in Game 2.
The game disconnected. Yep, okay, yeah, the game disconnected. Yep, Pokemon is a small indie game. Anyway, in Game 3, Yantong leads Hearthflame Wake into Joe's Gouging Ogre. Yantong goes for Sun strats once again. Hearthflame swaps to Torkoal and gives Wake a speed boost, but Joe safely scouts with a double protect, seeing that the Draco Meteor targets into his Gouging Fire. Following the scout, Ogerpon Wellspring rips Terra for the special defense boost, Helping Hand comes out from Torkoal, Ogre follows me and takes the Draco from Wake while Gouging Fire breaking swipes for chip damage on Torkoal and a respectable 40% to Walking Wake. Torkoal again goes for Helping Hand, but to cover his bases, Joe again goes for Follow Me. Draco Meteor hits the Ogerpon for the knockout. This was a great play from Joe. Instead of getting aggressive and losing Gouging Fire there, he keeps it healthy, and Breaking Swipe in return gets the knockout because of the 2 turns of Life Orb recoil on the Walking Wake. Ogerpon Hearthflame comes in for Yantong, Chi and Pow takes the field for Joe. Pow protects for Joe, easily scouting the Spiky Shield from Ogerpon, Gouging ramps the attack stats with Howl, and Torkoal's Heat Wave does almost nothing to Gouging Fire. Joe is in a commanding position. Now backed into a corner, Yantong goes for a massive risk with huge upside. Ogerpon just Spiky Shielded, but a 1 in 3 chance to hit the double Spiky Shield could break Pow's Sash and swing the momentum. And it works! Joe shows why he's a world-class player here though. He actually goes for Ice Spinner into Torkoal instead, a subtle but game-cementing read. Heat Wave would have KO'd the chip Pow, but instead it only brings Pow to his Sash. Also, in case you wondered why Joe was Ice Spinnering, it was to cover Fluttermane switching in, and what do you know, Torkoal swaps to Flutter the next turn. Ogerpon Terra fires, Breaking Swipe does over half to Ogre, and Ice Spinner finally finishes it off. Without Terastallization, Flutter is a sitting duck to Sucker Punch from Pow, and the game is completely locked. Joe wins and is now only 1 win away from advancing into Day 2. In Round 7, what the fuck? This set was 40 minutes long, and it has a Dondozo winning. Okay, on this channel, we strive to breathe life into as many matches of thrilling gameplay that we can cover, and Dondozo is not it. Anyway, in Round 8, we got a hometown hero and crowd favorite Jamie Boyd using a Pokemon not many have explored yet, Primarina. This set was thrilling, and I honestly recommend you go check it out on the live stream.
Also, go check out Jamie's YouTube channel. He does really great guides on niche Pokemon and is a fantastic player that puts out entertaining content supported by his fundamentally sound understanding of VGC. I'm not gonna say anything that happens in here, just actually go watch the set. For the final match of the day, and as is tradition, we get a win-in. One player advances to day 2, and the other has their dreams crushed. This time around, we had a death match between Sergio Sanchez and Kyle Duran. On Kyle's team, Farigiraf, Incineroar, and Scarf Urshifu, like Wolf Charlotte winning team, were the core of this squad. But Chi and Pao, Raging Bolt, and Teal Mask Ogerpon rounded this composition out in a much different way. Sergio's team was looking even more intriguing, however. I mean, come on, look at it. It's a Weezing, look at that guy. He's got a top hat. In Game 1, Sergio leads Weezing and Roaring Moon into Rapid Strike Urshifu and Raging Bolt. Immediately, Kyle terras the Raging Bolt into an Electric type as Sergio protects his Roaring Moon to avoid a knockout from close combat, but the Urshifu Surging strikes into Weezing. Weezing gets a Will-O-Wisp off into Urshifu for its troubles, and it's a good thing it outspeeds the Raging Bolt because Thunderbolt cleanly finishes it off right there. Sergio switches in his own Bolt to match the Bolt on the field. Kyle swaps Urshifu for Incineroar, Roaring Moon Tailwinds, and Sergio's Raging Bolt gets a Snarl first with the speed change, while Kyle Dragon Pulses Roaring Moon, but only after the special attack drop, meaning it doesn't KO. On the next turn, Kyle's Incineroar fake outs the Raging Bolt, but Roaring Moon gets a Breaking Swipe off. Expecting a Protect from Moon and fearing a massive Dragon attack from Bolt, Kyle Dragon Pulses Sergio's Bolt for a good chunk of health. Sergio now swaps Roaring Moon out for Golden Go, fearing a knockout, and his Bolt tosses another Snarl out, but it misses the intended target, which was Kyle's Bolt. To make things even worse, Kyle's Dragon Pulses and crits the Goldengo for a huge chunk of damage as Incineroar knocks off Sergio's Assault Vest from the Bolt. On the final turn of Tailwind, Kyle swaps Incineroar for Urshifu, but Goldengo fearlessly nasty plots without even defensively terastallizing. Sergio's Raging Bolt fires off a Thunderbolt into the Incineroar slot, which is now an Urshifu, and it drops in one shock. In response, Kyle gets a Thunderbolt into the Goldengo but doesn't take it out, and Pao is revealed to be the last. With Bolt and Chi and Pao there really doesn't seem to be an out after missing that Snarl earlier, so Kyle wins Game 1. In Game 2, Sergio leads Roaring Moon Arcanine into Kyle's Raging Bolt Urshifu. Kyle tries to utilize Urshifu's pressure into Arcanine to buy a safer switch into Incineroar, but Sergio Terra Grasses to mitigate that threat. Kyle then Terra Bolts and gets punished for it. Knockoff removes its Assault Vest, and Arcanine head smashes as a follow-up. Even with the Intimidate, Bolt takes massive damage but hangs on with 26 HP, just enough to Dragon Pulse Moon in response for almost identical damage. Fearing Fake Out, Roaring Moon protects and Kyle flinches the Arcanine instead, but his Thunderclap fails. The next turn, a priority Thunderclap hits Arcanine, but even with the recoil and Terra Electric, it fails to get the knockout. Roaring Moon Tailwinds, and with a sliver of health left, Arcanine lands another Head Smash into Incineroar for the knockout. Arc feints to recoil, so the players go Doge for Doge. Bolt hits the field for Sergio, and Kyle sends out Chi and Pao. Because of Tailwind and Kyle's damaged Bolt, a Thunderclap from Sergio finishes it off. This enables Roaring Moon to Breaking Swipe Pao for chip, lower its attack, and the Ice Spinner that hits Sergio's Bolt in return barely does over half. Urshifu comes in to try to turn things around. With Kyle's outs looking bleak, Urshifu Aqua Jets Roaring Moon to avoid a Thunderclap, but it's now locked into that move. Thunderclap does fail, however. The Moon gets another Breaking Swipe off, but Pao lives and knocks out Bolt with probably a max roll on Ice Spinner. Single Strike Urshifu hits the field as Sergio's last, and with all the options exhausted and Kyle's Urshifu locked into a minus attack Aqua Jet, Kyle loses and the players move to a climactic winner-takes-all Game 3. In that Game 3, Sergio leads Roaring Moon and Raging Bolt into Kyle's final choice of Incineroar Farigiraf. Sergio easily swaps in Arcanine, and Kyle makes a combination of plays that only really classify as suboptimal here when done together. First, Farigiraf Terra Fairies to resist knockoff and get a Dragon immunity. Incineroar fakes out the Bolt, Farigiraf sets Trick Room. The thing is, if you were gonna terastallize Farigiraf, you should Parting Shot the Bolt slot to maximize Trick Room turns. Incineroar isn't a real threat under Trick Room, especially when Intimidate is an option. Under Trick Room, Kyle continues to play rather passively. Farigiraf Psychics Arcanine, Incineroar knocks off the Raging Bolt, and a Thunderbolt hits Farigiraf. But without knocking out the Arcanine, or at least knocking off its Choice Band, it can Flare Blitz that slot too for the clean KO. Bolt now comes in for Kyle. Sergio, thankful to still have an Arcanine this far into Trick Room, swaps it out for Moon. Kyle protects Bolt since they can't shed the Dragon weakness with Terra, but Sergio's Bolt does exactly that with Terra Fairy. Incineroar hits Roaring Moon with Flare Blitz for almost nothing, and Sergio snarls. On the third turn of Trick Room, Sergio sacrifices Arcanine, but aggressively doesn't protect Moon to get some clutch damage with knockoff on Kyle's Bolt. Urshifu now hits the field.
With Trick Room expiring, Incineroar pivots to Chi and Pao correctly as Sergio tries to reposition with Bolt and protects the Urshifu. Dragon Pulse lands into the now Fairy-type Pokemon for 0 damage, and the Trick Room finally ends. Kyle uses Chi and Pao as bait, swapping Incineroar back in. Thunderclap succeeds into Urshifu, and now at -1, the close combat that hits the Incineroar doesn't KO. It just procs the Figgy Berry for some recovery. Sergio's Bolt goes for Snarl, thinking it would pick off a Chi and Pao after hanging on with Sash, and you can feel the pressure mounting here. Sergio swaps out Urshifu into Moon, correctly reading the fake out that targets the slot, and smartly, instead of KOing the Bolt with Draco, he covers a Dragon Pulse on the switch in with Snarl. This may seem passive, but it was perfect here to not give Kyle a free switch when your damage dealer is at -2 special attack. It took us a second here to realize that this was actually not an error whatsoever, it was all intentional. Sergio has a commanding position here now. Roaring Moon goes for Tailwind, and Bolt finally KOs Incineroar with Thunderbolt, and Dragon Pulse, now at -2 from Snarls, does under 50% to the Moon. In the final turns of the set, both players cling to life. Bolt claps Pao into range of any follow-up attack, Pao suckers the Moon, and Thunder claps it for the knockout. Urshifu takes the stage as only 2 damage Pokemon remain for each competitor, and every single Pokemon on the field has priority attacks that fail if they go last. Urshifu detects, Pao protects, Kyle's Bolt protects, and Thunderclap fails. It's a stalemate. Kyle attempts a double protect with Pao, but Sucker Punch connects on the Bolt for the knockout, and Draco finishes off the Sword Leopard once and for all. Sergio punches his ticket into day 2.
How are you feeling making it into your first day 2 right now?
I just don't believe it right now because the games was so close and game 1 was kind of stomp versus me.
And that wraps up day 1. We got a Mamoswine, a Zarina, a Registeel, none of which won their stream sets, but hey, it was cool to get a cameo, and their records indicate that there were still useful options throughout the day. Let's take a look at the overall metagame so far. In the last major at Charlotte, the field was slightly bigger. The first day of usage at that tournament showed Pokemon like Chi and Pao, Raging Bolt, and Entei in the top 6. But in Liverpool, Entei disappears, and Incineroar soaks up some of that juicy Fire-type usage to join the top 3. The Urshifu brothers trend up, while Chi and Pao begins to fall off. As expected, Fergaraf moved up in usage a ton following its double finals berth the week before, finally solidifying itself as the premier Trick Room setter in the format. But surprisingly, its partner in crime wasn't used as much as projected. After Blood Moon Ursaluna's big weekend, it hasn't cracked into top usage just yet. Seeing several troublesome Pokemon pop up on stream, Tinglu, Chi-Yu, and even Torkoal to an extent, may foreshadow why Ursaluna's step up into top usage hasn't become permanent, at least for now. It's important to remember also that deeper runs into a tournament don't always align with usage stats. In Charlotte, Ogerpon Hearthflame was on the final 2 teams but didn't even break into the usage graphic. It's also important to remember that you are important. You matter. To us especially. We really appreciate your support, actually. If you like these videos, please let us know, and if you want to see more, you can subscribe. Our goal is to recap every tournament for the rest of this season, and we have even bigger pieces planned if we hit 1,000 subscribers. Alright, let's get into day 2. For day 2, the stream went up in round 12. With a few rounds passing between the end of day 1 and the stream starting, Swiss record shifted around a little bit. Many of the familiar faces you'd expect to see were still in contention for top 8. But for the first stream match of the day, we were treated to the infamous Breloom Magnezone player from Turin last year, Roberto Parente. The matchup, however, not exactly a fan favorite. Psyspam versus Yon Perello and their Dondozo Glamora team. To start things off, Roberto sends out Tornadus Regidrago and Yon sends out Tornadus Urshifu. Yon's Urshifu Terra Stellars right away, both Tornadus click Tailwind and Urshifu uses Close Combat for a one-hit knockout into the Regidrago. Now Roberto sends out Iron Crown. And it daringly protects in front of Urshifu, who uses Sucker Punch and does 90% to the Tornadus. In return, that same Tornadus from Roberto uses Bleak Windstorm and connects with both, bringing Urshifu down to its Focus Sash. Indeedee finally hits the field and sets Psychic Terrain, but Yon is up 4 Pokemon to 2. Things already look kinda bleak. Urshifu clicks Detect. Tornadus once again connects a Bleak Windstorm on both Iron Crown and Indeedee, and the Iron Crown goes for Tachyon Cutter into Urshifu, but it gets blocked by that Detect. Indeedee goes for a Dazzling Gleam to get some chip on the Torn. Tornadus Bleak Windstorms again and connects with both, and Urshifu gets picked off by a Tachyon Cutter as Indeedee sets Trick Room right as Tailwind ends to maintain speed control. Dondozo now hits the field for Yon. Iron Crown tears into a water type as Ndidi clicks Helping Hand, readying up a massive expanding force, but both of Yon's Pokemon protect, and the first turn of Trick Room is successfully stalled out. On the second turn of Trick Room, Tatsugiri switches in, giving Dondozo the Commander boost, and Ndidi clicks Helping Hand as Iron Crown goes for expanding again. But clearly, as a result of some bulk on Dondozo, it does just under 50%. Dondozo Earthquakes in response, and Ndidi barely hangs on, and the Iron Crown is at about 20% health. Yon protects with Dondozo one more time to stall another turn of Trick Room, but Roberto sees the writing on the wall. This first bout is not going to go his way. He concedes, and Yon wins Game 1. In Game 2, Roberto switches up the leads. Didi and Crown hit the field first. On Yon's side, Tornadus and Urshifu start things off. Yon's Tornadus terastallizes into Steel, and Roberto's Iron Crown sheds its Steel typing to become a Water type. Ndidi clicks Helping Hand again, and Yon's Urshifu goes for Detect. Tornadus clicks Bleak Windstorm, and it misses the Ndidi but does just under 30% to the Iron Crown, and gets what could be an important speed drop on the Crown, but Roberto made a big read. He called the Terastallization as they go for Terra Blast into the Tornadus, and Yorn's Tornadus barely hangs on with 3 HP. On turn 2, the Ndidi clicks Follow Me, and Tornadus goes for Bleak Windstorm and connects on both. Wicked Blow targets the Didi for the knockout, but the Urshifu takes Rocky Helmet Chip in response, and this is crucial because it makes the Tachyon Cutter that targets it a guaranteed KO. Yeah, for some reason that isn't always guaranteed. Anyway, Yon sends out Dondozo as Roberto sends out Tornadus. On turn 3, Dondozo protects. Yon's Tornadus goes for Tailwind, Roberto's Tornadus goes for Bleak Windstorm but does not connect with the other Tornadus, and Iron Crown finishes it off with Expanding Force. Tatsugiri comes in once again for the Omni Boost. On turn 4, Roberto makes a great play. They protect their Tornadus, and Dondozo's Order Up targets into the Protect for no damage. Thank God they fixed that bug, but Iron Crown's Expanding Force does an important 30% in response. On turn 5, the Dozo does get the Order Up off into Tornadus, but it responds in kind with a Bleak Windstorm and another Expanding Force, leaving it with only 33 HP. On turn 6, Tornadus goes for Tailwind. Dondozo finishes it off with another Order Up, but it feints to one more Expanding Force. Regidrago comes in last, and as Tailwind expires, Yon concedes. Tatsugiri cannot pull this one off by itself. Roberto pushes it to a Game 3. In Game 3, both players lead the same thing as Game 2, New Age Psy Spam into New Age Torn Urshifu. Yon's Tornadus goes for the Terra Steel and Urshifu attacks, but Ndidi clicks Follow Me. Tornadus Bleak wins Didi for 30% health, but Iron Crown dodges it as Tachyon Cutter goes into the detecting Urshifu. On turn 2, Roberto Terra waters with Iron Crown to reduce Wicked Blow damage, and Yon's Tornadus Tailwinds. Urshifu Wicked Blows into the Iron Crown, but according to plan, the Terra helps it survive and it knocks the Urshifu out back with the Tachyon Cutter. And devastatingly, Ndidi sets the Trick Room, which is a massive swing turn for Roberto. Dondozo comes in next for Yon. On turn 3, Didi Helping Hands, then Dondozo protects. Iron Crown's Expanding Force does 70% of the Tornadus, even with Terra Steel granting the Psychic resistance, and Tornadus finally connects one more Bleak Wind. Even though Ndidi dodges it, this takes out the Iron Crown. Now, Regidrago takes the field for Roberto. Yon's Tornadus swaps out for Tatsugiri to boost up the Dondozo once again, and Ndidi uses Follow Me to protect Regidrago from the Order Up. The Regidrago goes for Draco Meteor into the Dondozo, doing a massive chunk of over 50% health, but calling out the Follow Me choice, Yon smartly clicks EQ to do 40% as a trade to both of Roberto's Pokemon. On turn 5, Didi swaps to Torn, another Draco Meteor from Drago actually low rolls, only knocking the Dondozo down to 5 health thanks to Unaware, but Dondozo Order Ups into the Tornadus as it swaps in, taking 60% of its health. Regidrago swaps out for Ndidi, and Roberto is fighting to seal this one up. Tornadus connects a Bleak Windstorm to knock out Dondozo, and as a result, Tatsugiri pops out onto the field, but it takes no damage. As Trick Room expires, Yon brings Tornadus back in, and the tension rises because this game could go either way. Both Tornaduses use Tailwind, and Tatsugiri connects a Muddy Water on both Pokemon for the knockout. Regidrago hits the field. Both players stall one more turn the Tailwind out. Tornadus misses Bleak Windstorm, and Drago outspeeds Tatsugiri. It connects the Draco Meteor for the knockout. One more Bleak Wind hits Drago, but it hangs on with a sliver of health and wins the set for Roberto by Earth Powering in response. Holy crap, what a finish. Roberto secures a guaranteed spot in top 8 with that win. In round 13, we got a glimpse at some of the frontrunners for the top 8. Eduardo Cunha versus Matt Rosen, Nils Dunlop versus Flavio Delpidio, as well as the English frontrunners Jack Clark and Jonathan Marston. The community choice must have figured we may see some of these faces later on, because instead we got a match between a promising young talent at their first ever regional, Keon Gregory, and Francesco Pardini, a 2-time Italian national champion and 2011 world quarterfinalist. Francesco isn't an established veteran resting on any laurels though. They recently placed 3rd at last year's Liverpool Regional. This was another instance of new talent taking on a veteran with prestige. Francesco was using a team that got overnight popularity the week of this event. Ogerpon Wellspring, Incineroar, Tornadus, Raging Bolt, Urshifu Single Strike, and a somewhat unpopular choice in this format, Goldengo. Keon, however, was not utilizing the most popular choices. Ogerpon Wellspring is common, sure, but the rest of the team progressively drops off the usage chart. Is this a Jamie Boyd team? Iron Hands, Roaring Moon, Hisuian Arcanine, Goldengo, and Galarian Articuno? It looks like a Boyd team. In Game 1, Francesco leads Ogerpon Wellspring and Raging Bolt into Keon's Iron Hands and Articuno. Iron Hands fake outs the Raging Bolt, Ogerpon goes for an Ivy Cudgel into Articuno, and the Articuno Trick Rooms. On the next turn, Francesco swaps Raging Bolt out to Goldengo, but Keon proves how they made it so far into this tournament already. Articuno Terra grounds, and as Ogerpon Spiky shields, Iron Hands launches a close combat and ground Terra Blast into the Goldengo for about 70% damage. This double up would have threatened that amount of damage or more into basically anything that swapped in, and Keon was smart enough to punish the reluctance to Terra so early in the set. On the second turn of Trick Room, Goldengo protects, and now with Ogerpon having just wasted its protect and no safe switch-ins, Keon double targets it with close combat and freezing glare for a knockout. Incineroar hits the field to hopefully slow the game down, but Keon's Articuno gets a competitive boost. With such a strong start and Francesco's hesitation on the terrestrialization, Keon rides this momentum to victory. With Tornadus on the bench, Francesco has no ground type switch in at all, but they won't have an easy time bringing Tornadus into a Trick Room team, especially without Taunt taking up a move slot. In Game 2, Francesco leads Urshifu and Goldengo, while Keon attempts to punish Francesco benching Incineroar with 2 physical attackers, Arcanine and Roaring Moon. Immediately though, we see this is not the case. Francesco swaps Incineroar in for Goldengo, and Roaring Moon sets up Tailwind. Arcanine launches a Banded Flare Blitz into Urshifu for a massive 60% through Intimidate, and Arcanine takes some recoil, but the Wicked Blow knocks Arcanine to 20 health. On turn 2, Keon swaps Arcanine into Iron Hands, and Roaring Moon gets a Breaking Swipe off. Urshifu survives and is able to throw a close combat into Roaring Moon, where at -2 it doesn't do nearly what it needs to, and Incineroar knocks off Iron Hands' Assault Vest, which by the way is pretty crucial for the potential Goldengo sweep waiting in the wings. Keon swaps out Roaring Moon into their own Goldengo, a seemingly brave choice with Wicked Blow being a threat. Francesco repositions Incineroar into Ogerpon, but it turns out with Tailwind up, Iron Hands outspeeds Urshifu and cleans up the low health remaining with Wild Charge. Incineroar comes back in for Francesco now. On the last turn of Tailwind, Keon swaps Moon back for Goldengo. Iron Hands close combats Incineroar, but with -1 attack, it does not get the KO, and Roaring Moon soaks up an Ivy Cudgel from Ogerpon. Incineroar parting shots off of Iron Hands back into Goldengo. Francesco finally rips Terra Fairy on Dango and protects it even further with Ogerpon's Follow Me, but Keon gets a Tailwind up and has Goldengo in the back still. Iron Hands does 40% to Ogerpon with close combat as Dango begins boosting up with Nasty Plot. Keon is trying to position their Arcanine and Goldengo for a late game closeout. Francesco is clinging on to life this game with the threat of Incineroar being able to knock out Dango while their own protects. Keon gets some more chip down, but Francesco makes a bit of an odd mistake for a veteran. He goes for Make It Rain and gets a double knockout. This leaves Keon 2 turns of Tailwind to hold a speed advantage and sweep with his last 2 Pokemon, Goldengo and Arcanine. So now, Francesco makes the only play he can. Goldengo swaps out to Incineroar. Keon goes for Terra Steel, which could give Francesco a chance to win if Incineroar survives and can fake out, but Block Slide and Life Orb Make It Rain secure the knockout on both. The only hope now is that after stalling Tailwind out with Protect, Keon's Dango proves to be faster than Francesco's, but it outspeeds and KOs for the win. Now, in only the first regional of their career, Keon is 1 set from a possible top 8 berth and a chance to defend his country's home regional. For the final Day 2 Swiss round, we get another win and in. The Spanish Trick Room specialist Alex Soto, who was a finalist at this event last year, will be taking on Harrogate Regional Champion Jonathan Marston, one of the UK's best chances in the current standings to defend their tournament. Soto's gym featured 4 different psychic types. I mean, anyone beating this guy should get handed a gym badge for God's sake. Indeedee, Iron Crown, Gallade, and Hatterene rounded out by Torkoal and King Gambit. Jonathan's team also had a Trick Room angle in Torkoal, Farigiraf, and Iron Hands, but with a cool twist. Gouging Fire comboed with Ogerpon Cornerstone and a Fluttermane to round out the fast mode. In Game 1, Alex sends out Indeedee Iron Crown, while Jonathan sends out Ogerpon Cornerstone and Fluttermane, opting for the fast mode here. On turn 1, Indeedee uses Follow Me as Ogerpon clicks Ivy Cudgel for 60%, but Jonathan whiffs a read immediately. Flutter goes for Shadow Ball into the normal type for 0 damage, then feints to Iron Crown's Tachyon Cutter. The Giraffe hits the field for Jonathan now. Next turn, another Ivy Cudgel takes out the Ndidi comfortably, and the Tachyon Cutter from Iron Crown surprisingly KOs Cornerstone. Farigiraf goes for Psychic into Crown, and it does barely anything. 2 turns, 3 knockouts. Jonathan sends out Torkoal, and Alex sends out Gallade. What's pretty cool about this 4 Psychic type comp is that Gallade has access to Wide Guard, and this makes it very difficult for Jonathan's Torkoal. Iron Crown Terra Waters and clicks Expanding Force for a knockout on Torkoal, but Alex doesn't pull the trigger on Wide Guard just yet. He clicks Sacred Sword, barely missing the finishing blow on Farigiraf as it eats its Citrus Berry, but with no Torkoal, the game is pretty much locked from here. Alex wins. Wow, that was only 3 turns actually. Alex Soto games are fun. In Game 2, Soto leads DD Crown, and Jonathan leads Ogerpon Farigiraf. Both players have potential for Trick Room modes here, but a knockout at the wrong time could mean getting completely reversaled by the opponent's Torkoal. On turn 1, Ivy Cudgel goes into DD and does 65%, Crown gets off an Expanding Force, and to our surprise, Ndidi finishes it off with Psychic. In the meanwhile, Farigiraf sets Trick Room. Torkoal now comes in, probably the last thing Alex wants to see. On the first turn of Trick Room, Torkoal Terra Fires and Giraffe Helping Hands, but Alex is familiar with this game. Iron Crown protects and Torkoal eruptions for a KO on Ndidi. This allows for a pretty easy swap into Gallade with Wide Guard. And of course, Gallade easily Wide Guards here because Jonathan's Torkoal has no single target fire moves. Jonathan knows they have to get through the Wide Guard, so they double target Gallade, but Earth Power Psychic into Gallade doesn't KO thanks to the hefty special defense stat that it has. An Expanding Force from Crown smacks into Farigiraf for chip, but knocks Torkoal down to only 9 health left. Torkoal protects to stall Psychic Terrain's last turn and possibly get one last Heat Wave off after Gallade goes down to Psychic, but Trick Room is about to end and Hatterene joins the party. A double protect here is perfectly safe to wait for normal dimensions. With limited choices here, Jonathan squeezes out the last bit of fight they can. Farigiraf swaps into Iron Hands to soak up the Tachyon Cutter from the Crown, but Alex is no slouch. Dazzling Gleam is a guaranteed lock with the Torkoal HP so low, Iron Hands and Torkoal both faint, and Alex Soto takes the set. Similar to the differences between Day 1 and 2 of Charlotte, Ndidi makes its way into the top 12. The top 4 Pokemon of Day 2 were of course Fluttermane, Ogerpon, and Incineroar, but at the 3rd place slot, that Urshifu isn't what you think it might be. Urshifu Single Strike was now 3rd in usage, and Rapid Strike Urshifu was probably somewhere on a missing persons poster. Landorus Incarnate makes a grand return, and just like in Day 1, Chien-Pao usage slips further and further down. But without further ado, our top 8 bracket is set. But first, let's send some props over to some players who fought valiantly but couldn't quite make it there. For anyone holding out hope for Alex Soto and Keon Gregory, both fell victim to the bubble. They both finished Day 2 strong, but for the second time in 3 streamed events, we got an 11-3 finish into the anticlimactic bubble. Joseph Ugarte managed to place in the money with the opposite of bad resistance at 10-4, and Marco Silva remarkably made Day 2 with only 4 Pokemon. But sadly, no one from the United Kingdom managed to sneak into top 8, meaning for the second year in a row, a non-British country would win the event. So let's take a look at the countries that do have a shot. From France, Aurelien Sula. From Portugal, Eduardo Cunha. From Italy, Flavio Del Pidio, Nico Davide Cogneta, and Roberto Parente. And from Spain, Jaume Perello, Guillermo Castilla, and Antonio Sanchez. For the first match of the top 8 bracket, we were treated to a contest between 2 of Europe's best. Eduardo Cunha versus Nico Davide Cogneta. Eduardo was using a slightly unconventional offensive team. Tornadus, Ogerpon Wellspring, Incineroar, Urshifu, Raging Bolt, and a Pokemon I'm sure not many players would have expected to perform so well in this format, Goldengo. With Urshifu's premier form being a dark type in addition to having Incineroar and Ogerpon Wellspring, Goldengo may seem unintuitive. But as arguably the best setup Pokemon that gets around redirection and a threat that tends to beat everything else it does not lose to, Goldengo was actually pretty smart here. It also just happened to be a terrible matchup for Nico, whose team featured only 4 Pokemon. Once again, a team check resulted in a penalty here. Admittedly, this would have been an awesome set to watch and I would have loved to break it down, but no matter how hard Nico fought, and trust me, he fought valiantly, there was virtually no way to win this. In Game 1, the win condition was clear. Terra Fairy the Nasty Plot Goldengo and sweep. Nico did manage to bring it down to just the Raging Bolt, but was slightly too far behind in HP to close it out. In Game 2, the result was similar, but this time Nico was forced into a bad spot. They had to burn Terra Fairy on Raging Bolt. This created a turn where Goldengo takes it with Make It Rain because there was no Wicked Blow threat on the board, and a matching Terra Fairy on Raging Bolt for Eduardo can clean the rest of the game up. Eduardo moves on to top 4. From the winner of our thrilling round 12 match earlier, Roberto Parente again was on stream in this top 8 bout against 2022 world finalist and 2-time national champ Guillermo Castilla. Alright, the standard part, Ogerpon Wellspring, Landorus, Single Strike Urshifu. But to round out the rest of the comp, we had Booster Speed Fluttermane, AV Raging Bolt, and Banded Arcanine. Having this many heavy-hitting special attackers bear the burden of supporting the team isn't that new of a concept, but it deserves credit for being one of the first Regulation F teams to commit this hard to it. In Game 1, Roberto kicks things off with Indeedee and Choice Scarf Urshifu Rapid Strike, and Guillermo counters with Assault Vest Raging Bolt and Booster Speed Fluttermane. Very importantly here, Guillermo does not have Dazzling Gleam to work around redirection. Normally, the threat of a Wellspring Ogerpon's Water Absorb switching in dictates these turn 1 plays a lot, but Roberto is brave. Urshifu Rapid Strike immediately terastallizes, loading a Surging Strike sub. Indeedee Follow Me's to redirect Fluttermane's Moonblast, and Surging takes out the Fluttermane with no Water Absorb in sight. Raging Bolt's Electro Web connects on both, chipping Indeedee and smacking 65% into Urshifu while also dropping its speed. Now we see the Ogerpon Wellspring come in for Fluttermane. With awkward positioning, Roberto swaps Indeedee to Regidrago, and Guillermo has Ogre Cudgel into that slot, but the Dragon typing lets Regidrago shrug that one right off. Surging Strikes targets into Raging Bolt, doing 40% before Electro Web knocks the Urshifu out in response, and Crown hits the field next. On turn 3, Regidrago lost its speed advantage, so it swaps to Indeedee. Ogerpon Terra Waters, and Roberto's Iron Crown underspeeds Ogerpon, so Ivy Cudgel hits it first for huge damage. The Expanding Force does a respectable amount in return, but the tandem of special defense boosts keep both Pokemon pretty healthy. Raging Bolt snarls, reducing the special damage output even further, and with no speed control and health stats dwindling, Roberto can't find any footing. Guillermo wins Game 1. Roberto by this point is fully aware of how dangerous this Snarl AV Bolt is, something will need to change. In Game 2, Guillermo again leads Flutter and Raging Bolt into Roberto's new leads of Crown and Indeedee. The special attacking support team kicks off the damage control right away. Fluttermane Icy Winds to drop speed, Bolt clicks Snarl to drop special attack, but Iron Crown gets a Tachyon Cutter critical hit into Fluttermane for the knockout, and Indeedee just goes for a Gleam. Roberto missed a chance to go for Trick Room, and now Guillermo sends Ogerpon in. At this point, Roberto plays aggressive. No Protect on Crown, and Ogerpon cudgels Indeedee, Bolt uses one more Snarl, and it takes Indeedee out. Expanding Force, now at -2, only brings both Pokemon to 60%. No speed advantage, no redirection, but Regidrago comes in. Tornadus swaps in for Crown, Raging Bolt takes the chance to Terra Fairy in front of the Dragon Energy threat, but Drago protects. Ogerpon cudgels into that protect, and Bolt's Electro Web hits Torn for more than half. Because Guillermo attacked with Ogerpon the previous turn, Spiky Shield is available. Even though Roberto reads this and goes for Bleak Wind Earth Power into Bolt, the Assault Vest and Terra Fairy are too much. Another Snarl hits both in response. Roberto held Terra for the whole match so he could finally use this Terra Steel. Tornadus protects to block Ogerpon's Ivy Cudgel, and Drago fires back to knock it out. Thanks to that Steel Terra, Dragon Pulse gets shrugged off by Regidrago, but this Drago is at -3. Urshifu comes in as Guillermo's last. Roberto clings on to hope. Tornadus swaps back out again to Iron Crown, Thunderclap fails on the switch, but close combat from Urshifu KOs the Regidrago. Torn hits the field once again. Roberto is not in an ideal situation here, but it looks like there is one tiny ray of hope. He double protects, which is terrifying in front of an Urshifu's Unseen Fists. But Guillermo uses the two moves that fail on Protect, Sucker Punch and Thunderclap. Next turn, Tornadus Tailwinds. Guillermo Sucker Punches, and it's into the Iron Crown. It takes the knockout before Crown moves, and Bolt Electro Webs to close out the set. Guillermo moves on to top 4. And on the other side of top 8, Antonio Sanchez and Flavio Del Pidio ended up taking out Yoan Perello and Aurelian Sula. In our first semifinals match, we had Spain versus Portugal. Eduardo Cunha would be taking on Antonio Sanchez. That Bilbao 2022 match we never got to see. While not a world champion, Antonio was still a Bilbao Special Event finalist that year and recently placed in the top 8 of the Utrecht Special Event. He was also using a team we saw win the Charlotte Regional last week, and Wolfglick put this team on his Patreon with instructions, and maybe some of that world champ difference was proving a difference maker in this run, but yeah, I don't know, whatever. Still, throughout all we've seen at this historic tournament, no match was more of a David versus Goliath than this one. In Game 1, Antonio leads Rillaboom and Ogerpon Hearthflame into Eduardo's lead of Incineroar and Goldengo. Intimidate into 2 physical attackers looks good, but faster fakeout on Antonio's board means the Swords Dance threat is strong. To start the set, Goldengo swaps out into Raging Bolt, Tornadus swaps in for Incineroar, Rillaboom goes to fake out the Incineroar but hits the Rocky Helmet Tornadus on the switch in, so it takes some chip, but Ogre does get the Swords Dance off to get to +1 attack. Now Ogerpon Terra fires and gets to embody up its attack to +2, but Rain Dance from Tornadus cuts the attack power in half. Tornadus survives the Ivy Cudgel. Draco from Eduardo's Bolt hits Ogerpon and drops it to about 20% health, and Rillaboom U-turns off of Raging Bolt and goes into Fluttermane. Antonio effectively used the Ogerpon as bait. He swaps Ogerpon out to Rillaboom. Eduardo swaps Tornadus into Incineroar, meaning Rillaboom gets intimidated, but Antonio is playing a different mode here, Fluttermane Calm Minds. Thunderbolt hits Rillaboom, and if Antonio can maintain this setup mode, he looks poised to run away with this first game. Eduardo needs to aim for a Gholdengo setup himself. Bolt swaps to Torn. Rillaboom fakes out the Incineroar slot, but Shadow Ball picks off the Tornadus as it switches in. Now down a Pokemon, Gholdengo hits the field. It immediately uses Terra Fairy. Fluttermane's Moonblast goes first and targets Incineroar, which at +1 does about 60% and procs Citrus Berry. Gholdengo gets away with a nasty plot but sacrificed its Fake Out immunity too early. Rillaboom U-turns off Incineroar into Antonio's own Incineroar, while Eduardo parting shots the Fluttermane and goes back to Bolt. Flutter drops back to neutral special attack, and if Eduardo had taken a chance and preserved Terra this turn, the game may still be under his control. On turn 6, Incineroar goes for a Fake Out on Gholdengo and Flutter Calm Minds once again. Raging Bolt goes for Thunderbolt into Fluttermane, but at +2 special defense, it takes it comfortably. Fluttermane protects, Eduardo capitalizes and has Gholdengo use Nasty Plot. Bolt throws out another Thunderbolt now into the Incineroar, but Fake Out cycling continues as Incineroar parting shots the Bolt back to Rillaboom. Gholdengo protects as Rillaboom Fake Outs into that slot, and Fluttermane Moonblast into Bolt, but it barely hangs on. T-Bolt does very little to Flutter again, but Eduardo is getting the most damage into the correct targets that he can. Regardless though, it still isn't looking great. Bolt swaps out to Incineroar, Flutter protects, and Gholdengo finally switches to offense. Make It Rain does 90% to Rillaboom and takes the knockout. Ogerpon surprisingly comes back in rather than Incineroar. Ogerpon spiky shields, Incineroar fake outs into it out of almost necessity, and it takes recoil for it. Antonio, however, targets Incineroar with the Moonblast for KO, maybe expecting Gholdengo to protect or survive it, as it takes out Fluttermane with Make It Rain in response. Incineroar takes the field as Raging Bolt comes back in for Eduardo, and suddenly the game looks salvageable. Gholdengo protects, Incineroar fakes out the Dengo, and Bolt could turn this around if it thunderclaps, but in terrain, Grassy Glide outspeeds and dramatically KOs the Bolt. One more Ivy Cudgel wins the game for Antonio, and Eduardo, for a moment, looks mortal. He has to be concerned about this Calm Mind Flutter game plan. Even if it doesn't KO Gholdengo, it can handle the rest of the entire team and leave the Nasty Plot mode outpositioned in the final turns. In Game 2, Antonio mixes it up to keep the world champ on his toes, leading Farigiraf Urshifu into Incineroar Tornadus. Antonio has Urshifu U-turn into Incineroar. Tornadus Bleak wins, connects for good damage, and knockoff into Farigiraf removes the Throat Spray. Hyper Voice does get some chip right back, and Eduardo clearly wins the damage trade here. After a rough turn 1, Farigiraf protects. No fake out from Incineroar, so Bleakwind from Tornadus gets another connection, and Eduardo's Incineroar parting shots into Raging Bolt. Incineroar on Antonio's side goes for, what do you know, another parting shot off Raging Bolt into Urshifu. Tornadus gets off Tailwind, and usually this isn't the case, but Eduardo's Raging Bolt outspeeds Antonio's Choice Scarf Urshifu, and it gets a Thunderbolt off into it first for a ton of damage, but because of the parting shot, it doesn't KO. Urshifu close combats Bolt and Psychic follows it up, but it survives for the same reason. Farigiraf now protects to preserve Armor Tail, and Antonio sacrifices Urshifu to another connection from Bleakwind, which Eduardo is now 5 for 5 on. Incineroar comes in next. Raging Bolt swaps out to Gholdengo, Incineroar fake outs that slot, but Tornadus is locked in. Bleakwind connects into both Farigiraf and Incineroar, getting the knockout before Antonio could set Trick Room. Rillaboom comes in next, and from this position, Antonio is dead in the water. Eduardo gave a masterclass in the power of using Tornadus offensively. This game is over because Antonio can no longer break through Incineroar. Tied up at 1 game apiece, a finals appearance on the line, both players have nothing left to hold back. Antonio, realizing that his Calm Mind setup was crucial in the first game, goes back to that plan and even intends to play it faster this time. Fluttermane hits the field first with Rillaboom for the fastest fake out available, but Eduardo is a world-class player and leads the best possible counter for this, Incineroar and Gholdengo. On turn 1, with pressure from both setup Pokemon, the outcome is almost predestined. Flutter Calm Minds immediately, and Gholdengo goes for Make It Rain before nasty plotting at all to keep pace with the Fluttermane setup. Antonio makes a slight mistake here because Rillaboom U-turns and goes into Incineroar, but Eduardo also slightly misreads and uses Parting Shot off of Eduardo's Incineroar, not Fluttermane, going into Tornadus. Even this deep into the tournament, it's likely that both players don't know each other's speed stats or bulk. Eduardo gambles that Antonio will play scared, and if you recall, the Terrestrialization too early in the first game basically lost Eduardo that match. By design or by chance, Antonio covers his bases. Fluttermane Shadow Balls into the still Ghost-type Golden Go for a massive one-hit knockout. Tornadus Bleak wins and once again connects both. Incineroar parting shots off Tornadus into Rillaboom, and Incineroar comes in for Eduardo. On turn 3, Tornadus swaps out to Raging Bolt. Rillaboom fakes out the Incineroar and Moonblast targets it as well. Eduardo has no switch-ins. Flutter throws one more Moonblast out and it knocks out Incineroar. Thunderbolt just barely misses the finishing blow on Fluttermane, and to maintain fake-out pressure, Rillaboom U-turns off Raging Bolt into Incineroar. In a last-ditch effort to fight back, Eduardo goes for Terra Fairy with Raging Bolt. Incineroar fakes it out and Moonblast hits it for a good chunk of damage. Tornadus clearly doesn't want to lose because it launches a no-look Bleak Wind and it connects with both again. 11 for 11, Ogerpon finally comes in. It Terrafires for the attack boost, and Tornadus predictably Rain Dances. However, Ivy Cudgel, even with the rain, knocks out the Fairy Bolt. Fake out from Rillaboom and Swords Dance from Ogerpon locks the game from here. Even with a transcendent shooting performance from Tornadus, Eduardo just barely falls short. Antonio moves on to the finals of the biggest European regional ever. Meanwhile, on the other side of top 4, our previous stream match winner Guillermo Castilla would be taking on Flavio Delpidio. This match was amazing. Two decorated veterans of Europe's strongest nations dueling in a matchup that was highly competitive. Don't cheat yourself out on this one, we're not going to cover it in full here, but please go check it out on stream. Alright, we've made it. The biggest regional in Europe's prestigious history. Two players that were not at the top spots of Vegas's betting sheets. Antonio Sanchez, a player who has only barely been this close once before, would be taking on Flavio Delpidio, one of Italy's best. But Flavio has succeeded at every level. At the 2022 World Championships, he placed top 16, he won the European International Championship in 2019, and he has multiple regional titles under his belt. Antonio, once again, would be facing a titan. Flavio's team was mostly standard, but had some technology unlike anything we had seen this format. Fluttermane, Ogerpon, Incineroar, and Rillaboom were complemented by the prodigal Fire-type Heatran and a below 1% usage Pokemon in this meta, Baxcalibur. For those who tuned into the top 4 set, you're in the know for the Baxcalibur use cases. For everyone else, you're about to find out. Let's check it out. In Game 1, Antonio leads Rillaboom Urshifu into Flavio's Incineroar Baxcalibur. Getting Intimidate into two physical attackers right away makes Flavio's Baxcalibur much safer than it usually feels in front of the threat of an Urshifu close combat. Antonio also has faster fake-out pressure. Both players trade fake-outs into the Baxcalibur and Urshifu, meaning that Flavio was likely comfortable trading Incineroar for Rillaboom. We also see Baxcalibur get grassy terrain before Rillaboom, which likely means Baxcalibur is faster. Antonio goes for Terra Water, but instead of Surging Strikes into Incineroar, it targets the Baxcalibur for 40% of its health. Baxcalibur utilizes its strong position to get a Swords Dance off. Rillaboom U-turns off of it for a little extra chip, and Antonio sends in Incineroar to set up another fake-out play. Flavio's Incineroar goes for a parting shot off of Urshifu, which doesn't impact Surging Strike damage, but is still a strong tool for repositioning to Ogerpon Wellspring. On turn 3, Antonio has the chance to fake out Ogerpon to prevent Follow Me and send another Surging Strikes into Baxcalibur, but it looks like with its current health it's just out of range. He unexpectedly repositions to Rillaboom with Incineroar rather than using Fake Out, but Flavio understands the leverage the Baxcalibur health affords him and Follow Me's anyway. Urshifu's Surging Strikes do a whopping 0 damage, and a Glaive Rush from Baxcalibur scores a massive one-hit knockout on Antonio's Urshifu. Not a great start, but there's still more to see. Ogerpon comes in now for Antonio. Flavio pivots out Ogerpon into Incineroar to get an easy Intimidate into the two physical attackers on Antonio's board, and Flavio looks to be in complete control. But when Antonio was backed into a corner, he didn't quit, he fought. Rillaboom swaps into Incineroar, Flavio protects Baxcalibur, and Ogerpon courageously Swords Dances. The fake out from Rillaboom and Ogerpon's Ivy Cudgel threatened a knockout on Baxcalibur, so Flavio appeared to be making the right play, but Antonio was already dreaming about that regional title and his gameplay showed it. After two fake outs stall a turn, Flavio tries to swing momentum back in his favor. He attacks with Baxcalibur, but Antonio turns up the heat and again makes a call out. Predicting the no protect, Ogerpon Ivy Cudgels for the knockout on Baxcalibur. Incineroar parting shots out to Heatran, and Antonio also parting shots this Heatran so Rillaboom and its fake out pressure can get this game rolling. Incineroar takes the place of the fallen Baxcalibur. Antonio uses Rillaboom to fake out the Incineroar, and Ogerpon Swords Dances again. Even though Flavio objectively made the right play, the Magma Storm is only 75% accurate and it completely whiffs the Ogerpon. Without that damage and the Magma Storm effect, Flavio is done for. Antonio runs with this fortunate swing and handedly takes Game 1. On tournament point, a familiar mix-up option hits the field. Choreograph Urshifu face down Flavio's Baxcalibur Incineroar. With no games to spare, Flavio cannot get this turn wrong. No funny business, no terrestrialization, no switches, Urshifu just goes right for close combat into Baxcalibur, and it crits! Baxcalibur goes down in one shot to a moment that any seasoned player would say crit mattered to, because crit mattered. Incineroar parting shots off of Choreograph into Flutter Mane, and Hyper Voice does no damage. Incineroar hits the field and drops the Urshifu's attack even further. Urshifu swaps out to Rillaboom, and Flavio Terra Fairies Flutter for the damage boost, Incineroar even helping hands for good measure. Dazzling Gleam does massive damage to Rillaboom and Farigiraf, who psychics at -1 into Flutter for a measly 15% after terrain recovery. This game could go either way now. Antonio doesn't want to lose control though. He swaps Farigiraf to preserve Armor Tail for later, Ogerpon comes in, Rillaboom fake out flinches the no longer ghost type Flutter Mane, and Fate finally throws Flavio a bone. Flare Blitz crits Antonio's Ogerpon, but it barely hangs on with 3 HP. Antonio is so close to victory. Having double Grassy Glide pressure scares the Flutter off the field, and Wellspring comes in. Ogerpon Hearthflame goes for Terra Fire, and Grassy Glide does massive damage to it, and the game-clinching U-turn into Ogerpon finishes it off. With Scarf Urshifu and Farigiraf still intact, Antonio has a perfectly secured endgame into Flutter Mane and Incineroar. Surging Strikes finishes off the Flutter Mane, and Flavio gallantly fights it out, but Flare Blitz Recoil finally finishes off his Incineroar. Antonio Sanchez, a player we all knew could do it, wins the biggest European regional of all time. Antonio might have had a bit of luck break his way there at the end, but the gameplay was still fantastic. It feels like the RNG only deprived us of the chance to see more of it. You beat a world champion, a national champion, and all that Europe could throw at you to try to deny what was rightfully yours. You got your title and secured a world's invite. Well done. And that wraps up our coverage of the biggest European tournament of all time. Melbourne and Knoxville just wrapped up, and Dortmund is next. Stay tuned for our recaps on those events, and make sure you subscribe if you like this, because this took me a really long time, and it just took me so long. Please subscribe, please. I'm begging you.